Greetings, innovators and leaders. This is AI for the C-Suite, your compass for navigating the exponential age. I'm Chad Harvey, and we're here to bring you cutting-edge insights on AI tailored specifically for middle market organizations. Buckle up as we embark on a journey through the transformative world of artificial intelligence. My guest today is Matt Ruck, founder and CEO of XOP.AI. XOP is an automation and AI consultancy specializing in transforming IT services. Matt's a former CEO of designDATA, a leading managed services provider where he spearheaded several key initiatives, including the establishment of a robust security practice and the creation of a state-of-the-art NOC SOC. For those of you that don't know what NOC SOC are, we can get to that later. Matt's expertise in AI and automation has been instrumental in the development of self-help IT, as well as HR chatbots, which empower end users to resolve issues independently. He's dedicated to helping organizations leverage AI as a knowledge management platform to boost employee efficiency, and is committed to implementing safe, trustworthy AI and automation solutions. Matt, welcome to AI for the C-Suite.
Thanks, Chad. Appreciate you having me.
It's my pleasure. So, to kick things off, why don't we start and you tell me a little bit about your journey into the world of AI. You and I had some fascinating offline conversation the other week when we were chatting, and you gave me every indication that you saw a lot of opportunity, just as I and many others saw when this started to break several years ago. So tell us a little bit about your journey into the world of AI and how you've seen it evolve in recent years.
Sure. So, as you alluded to there in your introductory remarks, I'm the former CEO of designDATA. I had a 28-year career running an IT services practice. And really, as the pandemic started in 2019, I saw the beginnings of AI. You started to hear rumblings of chatbots coming into play. At the same time, we understood that there was going to be a work from home, a disparate workforce attribute coming into play. And I saw basically events transpiring with Microsoft buying Skype and rebranding it as Microsoft Teams. And so the confluence of AI and chatbots and work from home and having a disparate workforce and having to train employees in remote locations, all of these things coming together, I didn't know exactly what it was going to look like, but I knew that AI was going to become very instrumental into the future of AI. And I started the underpinnings of my company then. I was still working for designDATA at that time, but I knew that I was going to have the groundwork for a new firm at that time. And so I started what I was calling at that point a knowledge management consultancy, a knowledge management firm. And that's basically the beginnings of what we have today, which is using AI to connect people to information. And, AI can do a lot of different things. I tried to break up AI into 4 different categories. I think there's a knowledge management component to it. I think there's a content creation component to it. I think there's a data science component to it. And I think there's an automation and a robotics component to it. Those are the 4 categories that I tend to categorize AI into. And my firm is predominantly focused into that knowledge management component. So the ability to educate people, to inform people, to get them access to content quickly and efficiently. And that's really what my firm is focused on. It's connecting people to information and training AI on private data stores. And, you're going to have the Googles and the Microsofts and the Amazons and the Facebooks of the world, which are going to create large language models and train on swaths of data, worldwide data. But, my niche is going to be training on private data sets.
Mm-hmm. All right, Matt, you just went through enough information. We could probably spend the next 40 minutes talking about your 4-level categorization and a number of points you touched on. Instead, I'm going to pull one particular thread, since you're in the knowledge management side of things, self-authored there. One of the things that I see an awful lot with organizations is they don't have ready access to their data. Their data is in so many different silos. And when we talk about knowledge management, I think data is a fundamental component of that. So how are you working through the disparate sets of data that are out there to get to knowledge management? Because I'm sure you come across this all the time.
Sure. So there's a couple different schools of thought there. First, I think most consultancies come in and say there needs to be a total assessment on data governance, and that we need to go in and analyze every folder and every file and try to delineate it and have attributes against it and try to really have a clean closet, so to speak, and to figure out exactly what data exists, where it resides, who has access to it. And I think that's probably the appropriate way of looking at it. Okay. The problem is that that is a Herculean project in any organization, small or large. And when I ran designDATA, and we would consult with organizations, we would say just that, is that you basically, before undergoing a project like this, that you really need to have your closet in order. And rarely could anyone accomplish that. And even if they did, to keep it going once you have accomplished it is nearly impossible as well. And so, the way that we look at it from XOP.AI's point of view is that we take the client as they are, even if they have data in multiple sources, and even if they're unsure as to who has rights to the particular data. And our approach is such that we ingest data a little bit at a time. Okay. So let's say that the customer has data and it's sitting in SharePoint, and they have some other data and it's existing in Dropbox, and they have other data that's in some sort of intranet, another portal. When we're interviewing business leaders, and let's say that our first use case is one of HR, and we want to build an HR self-help chatbot. And the purpose is that the everyday employee, we want to be able to ask HR related questions that you would normally ask an HR official, questions relating to paid time off, benefits, policy, procedure. Instead of scouring the network and trying to ingest all of that automatically, we would go to the HR department and say, okay, show me where the latest employee manual is, show me where the policies and procedures are, and we would ingest that data very explicitly and in a very controlled manner. And then we would test the AI after ingesting that data, one file, one folder at a time. So there are different approaches. You can have a data governance project that could stretch 6 or 7 months and spend thousands of hours of labor in order to get to the endpoint. Or you could start at point zero, not ingest data in swaths, but instead take a step-by-step, file-by-file, folder-by-folder approach and ingest it that way. And I would argue that both could have, an acceptable outcome at the end.
You raise an interesting question there, and I love the approach that you're taking with your clients, because that data piece is a huge hurdle. And what I'm finding, especially with medium-sized to larger organizations, that's a big stumbling block for them. They can't wrap their head around the fact that they aren't going to need to engage in that type of massive data organization project that you just mentioned. And I think one of the questions that comes up as a result of what you just outlined there is, as the technologies develop, right? We saw the 5-level classification scheme that OpenAI put out recently about where they're going. We've seen some similar stuff in different veins from Google and others. So we understand what the path looks like, at least the intended path forward, right? So to circle back to the point that you were making, what I wonder is, do you envision a time in the not too distant future where the tools have gotten more sophisticated and they've gotten to the point where this data management piece is no longer an acute pain point for companies, and instead of kind of piecemeal ingesting, and I don't mean that in a negative way, basically what you just outlined, we can do wholesale ingestion or digestion, if you will, of large sets of data that for the most part would be unstructured in a lot of different places. Do you see that as a possibility in the future?
Not in the short term. I think that, I'll give you an example. Recently, one of the things that came up with Copilot and data ingestion relative to Copilot Studio is that the ability to bypass the Microsoft graph and the data classification scheme was that if one shared a link with a colleague by simply taking a file in Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Word and literally going from file, share, and copying the link, that bypassed the security attributes that were set up inside the Microsoft Graph. Okay. There's too many ways that the data classification system can be bypassed today. And so, I think that, all of these systems are prone to being subject to error, whether it's human error or whether it's error inside the data classification systems themselves. And frankly, I don't know that we can trust either side of the equation, whether or not we can trust the human being and inadvertently bypassing that, or whether or not we can trust the technology itself. And so, no, I don't think we're at a point where we can trust the technology to auto class some of this stuff. I do think it's getting better on trusting some of the PII data. So, for example, identifying when there's credit card information or social security numbers, and the AI not giving information and answers that has some of that data. I think that's very much getting better, and not distributing some of that information in answers. But overall, I'm not sensing a high level of trustworthiness otherwise.
Got it. No, I appreciate your perspective on that. And a lot of times I run into folks that think that there's some type of magical solution that's just around the corner. And I appreciate you walking us through some of those specifics. I think that that gives a lot of insight into what we can expect in the short term over the next 3 to 5 years. And since you mentioned Microsoft Copilot, I've got to ask, so you're in the essentially the chatbot business here, a term I don't always love because I feel like it diminishes what these tools can do. But regardless, we'll call it a chatbot. Mm-hmm. How is what you're doing different than Microsoft Copilot? And that's a whole other sticky wicket, since Microsoft's got 6 different products or something branded Copilot. But how is what you're doing different than Microsoft Copilot?
Sure. No, I appreciate it, Chad. And so, Copilot is an ecosystem of tools. And when people think of Copilot, they mostly think of Copilot 365, which is the Copilot that's embedded into the Microsoft Office suite. So Copilot for Word, Copilot for Excel. This is an assistant that's operating inside the Office suite. But what folks probably don't know of yet, but you will soon, is Copilot Studio, which is a platform that enables you to build your own chatbots. So Microsoft has their own. You can build your own chatbots and then publish them to different channels. So you can build a chatbot and publish it inside Microsoft Teams. You can build a chatbot and publish it to Facebook. You can build a chatbot and publish it to your website. And frankly, it's very powerful. They have plugins to connect to different data sources. And in some ways, it competes with my tool and my chatbot. The differentiators are that essentially you have to be a Microsoft Power Platform engineer to use it. And so I say, it's a platform versus a product. Mine is a product. The business community can use it. It's a product that can be co-managed between us and the actual customer. It's easy for the customer to manage their own data, that kind of thing, versus a platform that you truly need to have Microsoft engineers to operate. And so I tell the customer that if you've got 2, 3 Microsoft Power Automate engineers that know how to use Power Automate, you should seriously consider Microsoft's product. If not, and you want the HR department to be able to manage the HR materials, and you have the operations department and you want them to manage the operations materials, you probably want to pick a product that's off the shelf. Another analogy that I would use is that it's akin to building your own software app ground up versus purchasing Salesforce.com, something that's off the shelf. It's sort of the build versus buy old
Right.
analogy.
Well, but doesn't everybody just have a couple Power Automate engineers laying around in their storage closet?
Yeah, no, they're sitting around. They're right there in the back.
That's right. Just waiting for the next project. Oh my gosh. Well, I know you've been doing this for a couple years, and you touched on a number of different points that were very interesting to me there. Before we get into kind of the journey and lessons learned here, let me go right to a point that you just raised in terms of what I'm going to characterize as democratizing access to information and empowering users, right? So with the deployments that you've engaged in thus far with your services and your chatbots, Where have you seen value created? How are you seeing this move the needle for organizations? And how are you empowering users to solve their own problems, essentially?
So the use cases that we love and the ones where we see the greatest ROI, the greatest impact in organizations, we love starting with the HR department.
Mhm.
The HR department is ripe for automation. It's ripe for AI. We tend to see a 60-70% reduction in workload for the HR department. Folks worry about, job security. That tends not to be a concern. Frankly, the HR department can be working on higher value activities. They should be working on things that directly correlate to employee retention, like career path, career plan, those sorts of things. They shouldn't be so concerned with nor working on clerical questions, how do I questions, those sorts of things. Um, if you've got a 200-person organization and you've got two IT people, essentially we can free up nearly an FTE's worth of activity to work on higher value tasks. The IT department, we can free up between 20 and 40% of the level one IT workload.
Mhm.
That's another big area. And then just general knowledge management. And so, if you think of the world through the eyes of a brand new employee that doesn't know anything, that's the way to look at these projects, Chad, is that we just go through and interview the folks at the organization that have been there forever. And I call them the Jedi Masters. And they're the people that get peppered with questions day in and day out. And we take everything out of their minds and we systemize it. And essentially, we look at their world through the eyes of being a mentor and training new hires. Where there's missing processes and procedures, we help the client train them. In many cases, we take those materials and we turn them into avatars, AI avatar animated training videos, which tend to be far more valuable than written procedures. People don't read anymore. And then we use the chatbots to find those videos. That tends to be, victories there in terms of using the chatbots. And also, when we meet with these Jedi Masters, the other unintended benefit is that it mitigates risk for the organization because these people tend to hold a lot of intellectual property, right? The COOs and the CEOs of these organizations, what they come to realize is that just by going through a project like this, is that they take a lot of that risk off the table. If these people leave, we systemize that intellectual property and we get it into the system, right? And that's important as well. So those tend to be the victories. That tends to be where the ROI is HR, IT, and then general processes, procedures, information, training, and looking through the world in terms of spinning up new employees and what do we need in order to make them successful.
I'm so glad you started with HR. And just for our listeners, we didn't script this or plan this out in advance, so I didn't realize you were going to touch on HR. And that's really a passion point of mine. I had the privilege a couple months ago of speaking to the Spring 24 conference of the Pennsylvania Society of Human Resource Management about AI. And one of my messages to them was that AI is an HR issue. And it came as news to quite a few of them. They had thought about this more as an IT issue. And I loved that you're finding value and use case in institutionalizing and kind of accelerating the deployment of the knowledge and unlocking the knowledge of those Jedi Masters in that space, because I think HR is absolutely ripe for this type of technology. So that's really cool. One thing that you touched on too, and it kind of spurred a question in my mind, so I'm going to throw you a curveball here. When we're talking about deploying these chatbots, let's stick with the HR use case, for example. And we know that the organizations that are building the off-the-shelf engine technology, it doesn't matter if we're talking about Google or Anthropic or OpenAI or Microsoft, they want to move to this level that they're calling agents, right? What do you think a realistic timeline would look like and could, so a compound question, what do you think a timeline would look like? And what might it look like in your world to take a HR chatbot and be able to turn that into a more semi-autonomous type of agent?
We can get from signature to deployment typically within 6 weeks for that particular use case. And that includes test out and user acceptance testing, that kind of thing. And usually what's interesting, Chad, is that the variable that you wouldn't expect is the most impactful part of it is that the underlying documentation that the customer supplies that's building up the chatbot experience sometimes has information that the customer is unaware that, derives unexpected answers. And we touched on this before, where I was giving an example of a client that was an ESOP, an employee stock owned program, where the ESOP underlying documentation was written in the late 80s or early 90s and was given answers from the Dukakis Reagan era. And it was hilarious, right? And they were saying, well, this is AI hallucination. And I'm like, well, maybe it was. Maybe I need to check into this. But in actuality, there were legal documents that was giving answers that was 35, 40 years old, right?
Wow.
And so there's a component of this that we have to go through, and we have to do user acceptance testing, UAT testing, and we pepper the bot with questions, and then we have to ensure that the answers are as expected. And sometimes a lot of this involves there's gaps in knowledge, and we've got to supplement that and create the documentation where, as I just mentioned, there's situations where the actual underlying knowledge that's being used is giving answers that's technically correct, but the actual underlying data needs updating.
I'm going to date myself. Now I've got this image of a chatbot in a tank wearing a little helmet like we saw Michael doing in that '88 presidential run there. So
yeah, that's right.
Oh my gosh, that's really interesting, and it just goes to one of the fundamental principles of good data management, which is garbage in, garbage out, right? And we're dealing with 40-year-old wasn't garbage at the time, but now.
Yeah, and it also goes back to the very beginnings of our conversation here, which is if you ingest data, and so you take an employee manual. Well, what happens with employee manuals? Well, you've got the employee manual from 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, and it builds upon each other. And you scour, and you've got 13 different copies of it, and then Gen AI uses all 13 different copies, and then you have discrepancies between the answers, or things that got deleted from one version to the next, but it's in a previous version, and the AI references that content, that kind of thing. And so it's hard, and the AI is not necessarily smart enough to disregard old content, that kind of thing. And so we can't rely on the AI to be smart enough to understand in every circumstance what to do.
That's a fantastic point, and I can kind of validate that through some peer-reviewed research, because there was a recently published study that we posted up on the platform that examined the hallucination rate of legal AI chatbots, and they looked at a number of the big ones. They looked at Westlaw, they looked at LexisNexis, they looked at Ask Practical Law, and if I'm remembering correctly, the hallucination rate for Lexis was 18% and Ask Practical Law was 17%. And I think you just gave an answer or an explanation as to why we can see some of that, because when you're looking at case law, when you're looking at different versions of statutes, it's probably very difficult for some of these systems to parse what's the most recent compared to the older version, right? And what are those discrepancies, and how do we navigate the path to get to what's accurate and what's not?
Absolutely. And the models will get better over time, right?
Yeah.
But it's going to take some time to do that.
Absolutely. What are some of the lessons that you have learned along the way? Because you're not fresh-faced. It's not like you're a 6-month-old startup here. You've got business experience. You knew what you were getting into here, eyes open, so to speak, when you began this several years ago. But what have been some of the surprises and some of the lessons that you've learned along the way as you've spun up XOP?
Sure. No, I appreciate that question. I do have about 2 years commercialized where I have actual business, and I've got 5 years experience, building the product out. So I think the biggest lessons that I've learned is that, number one, with my product, and again, it's not a platform, it's a product. We're AI engine agnostic, and we weren't to begin with. So we originally were just OpenAI, ChatGPT. Well, ChatGPT had some issues. You may remember about 6 months ago when their CEO, Sam Altman, was out, and then he came back in. And during that period of time, their product was basically unusable. And I don't want to, try to guess why that might be. But it got, their product was struggling for a bit of time. And so we learned at that point that we couldn't have our wagon tied to just that engine. And so we wound up signing agreements with Google. We wind up signing with Anthropic. So, now we've got three engines, and we have portability so that, we can fail over between one and the other, that kind of thing. So I would say, number one, we have to be AI engine agnostic. We can't be tied to one particular vendor. The second is that everybody talks about Gen AI, but really the world started with classic AI. Classic AI is basically scripted AI or curated AI. And everybody has seen this. They may not know that that's what we refer to it now, but you've all been on an HTML chatbot where it's basically taking you through a menu and giving you the next step, maybe a troubleshooter from Comcast or Xfinity or whatever the case may be. Scripted AI is basically the ability to use AI to find an answer, but the answer is the same every single time. And it may give you a link or the next step, that kind of thing. Whenever you're creating a chatbot, the ability to have predetermined content given to the user is absolutely critical. And I would tell you that when we create chatbots, 25-30% of the answers that we give the end user community are scripted answers. And so it's critical to have a combination of Gen AI and classic AI when you're building out private chatbots for an organization. I've also learned that lifecycle management of data is very critical. And what this means is that we're relying on the end user community to tell us when the chatbot is answering correctly or incorrectly. And this is not the same as when you're dealing with the ChatGPTs and the Google Geminis and the Anthropics of the world. They don't care so much, for end user feedback to determine whether or not their large language models are working. But in a private chatbot, we very much care. And so if somebody asks the chatbot a question on a private chatbot and they ask, what is our holiday schedule for 2024? And the chatbot does not answer that correctly. We need the end user to tell the chatbot, you didn't answer correctly. In our system, they do that by giving the bot a thumbs down. We track those negative responses in a database, and weekly, we have a business analyst go in and correct those responses. So the human interaction is critically important. Otherwise, the chatbot, the quality of the answers diminish over time. We need it to improve over time. So that feedback loop is very, very important. And then the last thing I would mention is that integrations with ITSMs are very important. So service desk ticketing systems and HRIS systems. So the systems that run HR departments, so the Paycoms, ADPs, UKGs of the world, being able to pull into these systems to grab documents or payroll data, ticketing data, all of these things basically further extend the system's capabilities, functionality, usability, those kinds of things. Those integrations have become critically important as well. So those are my 4 lessons learned.
What are you finding in terms of the ability to integrate with some of those larger enterprise level systems like the HRIS or some of the other ones that you talked about? Are you finding that the standard API is working and you can do some data dumps to a data lake or something like that? What are you finding in that realm?
Yes. So on the HRIS side of the house, we have to be very, very careful. The API stacks tend to be, for most of these enterprise applications, very mature at this point and very usable. We've done a lot with ServiceNow. We've done a lot with Jira, ConnectWise, UKG, Workday. And so, we're able to get in and make these chatbots functional at the user level. So for example, we can get it to the point where the user can get information on how many vacation days do they have? They can pull their own paycheck stub. They can do those kinds of things. And also on the ITSM side of the house, so the service desk ticketing side of the house, we're starting to work with service providers to leverage some of that data to help the service desk engineer with their ticketing, with their ability to analyze tickets, that kind of thing, use AI in that regard as well. And that's been beneficial. So that's sort of a fledgling industry for us. But again, we now have the ability to go into some of these ticketing systems and use AI to analyze tickets, use AI to help engineers solve problems. use AI to help service desk managers overall find tickets that are going poorly, that kind of thing.
Okay. I know you've also, and I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. I know you've been, much like myself, you've been on the road doing a lot of speaking gigs. I know you've spoken with ASAE at their AI Summit. I know that you've done some talks with different Vistage peer groups, another organization near and dear to my heart. I know that you've talked, I think, at Capital Bank. What are you hearing from the audience and from the leaders in those groups when you talk about AI? What are some of the more common questions? What are some of the misunderstandings? I'm just going to leave it very open. What are you hearing from these folks? What's the middle market pulse look like from your perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that um, so first off, there hasn't been a ton of investments that are made into the space. I think
Mm-hmm.
that in the middle market space, folks are still at the point where they're establishing beta test teams, they're assembling groups. I don't see a lot of budget being allocated at this point. It's still low dollar investments.
Yep.
I think CEOs understand that they need to make investments in AI and automation. They're unsure where to place their bets. And so, that's where I think it's practical use cases of AI. And I think that's what the industry is missing, Chad.
Mm-hmm.
It's that you don't need to have these weird science experiments to start off. Like we could save the weird science experiments for 2027, 2028. Okay.
But I
But
love weird science, Matt.
I do too. And we're both Klingon speakers. We
That's
were we
right.
were we were joking before we got on the podcast here today. But I think that everybody understands that this is the future, but they don't know where to start. I think Microsoft shops have experimented with Copilot 365. They tend to have made some investments into some Copilot 365 licenses. Uh, but I think folks are still, if you're afraid that you've missed out or that your organization is behind, I'll tell you that you're not. Because the first thing I do when I get into these talks is I start doing some informal surveys, like how many of you have done this, how many of you have done that. And it's the participation rates at this point is exploratory. That's where folks are. Okay. And I think that folks should start building cohorts. I think that Chad, folks that are in your position are going to be well equipped to help business leaders build out AI cohorts and start to strategize on what to do and how to do it and how to build a framework. Start to spearhead some of these initiatives. But I think, again, the low hanging fruit is where to begin. And I think it's going to be on evaluating some tools, starting with playtime. And you and I talked about this before. Playtime should evolve into use cases, and use cases should evolve into ROI, right? And that's how I think business leaders ought to look at this: is that you start to build uh, beta test teams, and you start to evaluate tools, and give some of your power users across departments the ability to test some of these tools and let those evolve into business cases. And then you take those business cases and you discern, okay, what sort of ROI can we expect out of it? But hopefully, your audience, Chad, got out of this that there's practical use cases just out of knowledge management and training chatbots against your data to empower every user. And I think that, frankly, just about every organization can do that and can deliver some ROI out of it.
I'm really glad that that's what you focused in on, Matt, because you hit a couple really key points there. One of the things that consistently comes up, and you nailed it, is there's no single killer use case or business application yet. And so a lot of organizations are really struggling when they look at AI and they're very unsure where to start. It's not like when the PC age began in the 80s and all of a sudden you had different spreadsheet applications, right? The utility was there immediately. People saw it immediately. They had a product, they could use it, it was well defined, then they could figure out how it applied to them. In this instance, we've got a very amorphous set of technologies that can do anything, right? And that's the problem, right? When you come to somebody and you say, well, you can do all kinds of things, they just don't know where to start. So I really liked what you touched on there. And you also raised up another issue that's near and dear to my heart, which is the sheer volume of information. And when I do talks, there's two slides in my deck. One deals with the exponential growth in the amount of data generated worldwide in terms of zettabytes, but also the exponential growth of peer-reviewed knowledge and information that is not just pure data, very distinct subsets. And my position is that whether we're talking at a macro level globally or whether we're talking within an organization, the amount of information within an organization and as a whole is such that it's almost impossible for human beings to keep up with it anymore. And I personally, one of my beliefs is that AI systems were inevitable given the rapid proliferation and the volume of information that we've got. I don't know how that strikes you, but that's, I think, a real pain point.
I'm not a data scientist, but I have to think that you're correct. It had to be inevitable that in order to just manage these swaths of data, that it started off as tools and evolved into AI. Because to your point, if it wasn't invented, this data would become incapable of being managed. And to some extent, you could say the advent of the search engine and Google, and then the others that followed suit, were probably the underpinnings of all this technology, right?
Yeah, very much so. All right, so as we get ready to wrap up our conversation here, 30, 40 minutes goes so quickly, and I could just spend hours talking about this, but I'm not going to be one of those guys that's got 3-hour-long podcast episodes. What's next for XOP.AI? Where do you see the organization going? Are there any kind of, future casting pieces that you can share about your future journey here with this?
Sure. So, we're still very much a knowledge management company, a knowledge management play, helping organizations empower every employee to become more efficient. I was alluding to the service desk management space. We're placing our bets there.
Mm-hmm.
My former life, I ran an MSP for 28 years, a managed services provider for 28 years. And we're building out use cases. And in fact, we've landed some MSPs to help service desk engineers solve problems more quickly. We're using AI to solve problems more quickly and to help their managers, service desk managers, identify tickets that are going south effectively. And so that's another big area that we're focusing on. And, so those are the areas that we're going to be focusing on, is helping IT service companies empower their engineers and empower service desk managers to solve problems. And then just helping the everyday business help their employees become more efficient, more productive, that kind of thing, and consulting on AI. That's enough, I think, right now, is to try to stay focused on those two areas.
Fantastic. I'm always so excited when I get to speak with folks that are what I like to think of as frontline, right? So they're not just imagining possibilities, they're not just futurists, but they're actually working with this technology. So I really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today. This was really fantastic. For our listeners who want to learn more about your work and get in touch with XOP.AI, which again, XOP.AI, XOP.AI, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yep, the company name is the website, so XOP.AI. Email address is matt@XOP.AI. We kept it simple.
All right, very good. Put that in your mailing list, people, and start spamming Matt. No, I'm just kidding. All right. This was a fantastic conversation, and Matt, just thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today and the journey that you're on. I have a feeling that you and I are going to be talking again in the future. All right. And for our listeners, thank you so much for tuning into AI for the C-Suite, where we're committed to helping middle market leaders thrive in the exponential age. If you found value in today's discussion, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, follow us on all the socials, and visit our site, aiforthec-suite.com. Join us next time as we continue to unlock the potential of AI for your organization. And until then, keep your algorithms running, your leadership evolving, and your AI in check. Take care.